Good afternoon, everybody. So I've been doing this a while, and I have to tell you that having listened to all of the presentations yesterday and today, and particularly this one, I am just amazed at how far we've come. Like when they asked in the beginning, show of hands, who's just starting measuring, who's already been into it, like everyone's doing something. It's really incredibly exciting, and I'm not sure I could have predicted it. So I hope you feel the same energy and enthusiasm that I do. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about the fact that we're approaching the 20th anniversary next year of the financial health movement. What started as an exercise to understand why and how the nation's financial system wasn't really reaching and serving everybody, it's become a powerful cross-sector movement to really improve financial health for all, including the most vulnerable. And I've been thinking about just how much has changed and how much we've accomplished together. We've changed mindsets, we've catalyzed solutions, and we have improved lives. In terms of changing mindsets, we've made the case that if we want to set people up to be resilient and thrive, then we have to go well beyond access and inclusion, and even beyond single-point solutions like financial education or even a new and improved loan product. We've got to understand people's financial lives holistically, and yet we need to be able to simplify that understanding into a single data point, a financial health score. We also need to be able to disaggregate the data along multiple dimensions of identity in order to drive equitable outcomes. And we need everyone at the table, not just financial services companies. Financial health is connected to so many aspects of people's lives: their physical and mental health, their education, their housing, and, as we just heard in part on the last panel, their livelihoods. This movement started in many ways as the financial services movement, but it has expanded to include employers across sectors as we take action on the financial health of workers. We've also catalyzed solutions through our investments in startups to our work with incumbents, and our work with not just financial services incumbents, but benefit providers. We've helped spawn a whole new set of products, practices, and policies across the spectrum. We've also built models, tools, infrastructure to enable providers to measure the financial health of their customers and workers with the push of a button through a tune, to guide them in developing a financial health strategy, and through a partnership with J.D. Power to certify that the largest banks in the country are doing a good job in providing their customers with the financial advice and support that they need. We've also begun to define good practice for employers through a toolkit for HR leaders to design and execute on benefits and programs to drive the financial health of the workforce. And through all of you, we have improved tens of millions of lives, whether it was through our Financial Solutions Lab, in which our portfolio companies have served more than 33 million people with products and services that help them spend, save, borrow, and plan. Whether it was through BlackRock's Emergency Savings Initiative, which we co-led in partnership with our friends at Commonwealth and Common Sense Lab, and which reached over 10 million people and increased their savings. Or our newer program, the Worker Financial Wellness Initiative, led by PayPal and Just Capital in partnership with FHN and the Good Jobs Institute. And we've now worked with over a dozen very large companies to drive a focus on financial health, and that has led to increased compensation and improved benefits for over 1 million workers. But there's one other thing that we've accomplished together that's really the key to all of the others, and that's the building of this ecosystem, of this network of financial services providers and employers and fintech innovators and HR leaders, community organizations, policymakers, funders, and more. This community of practice is what has enabled us to convert ideas into action and actions into impact. And we did all of this in the context of, at the time, what were new transformative technologies like the internet and the smartphone. The internet had just kind of gotten underway when we were founded in 2004, and the smartphone didn't exist yet. We've also lived through a financial crisis, a great recession, a pandemic, a racial reckoning, and now political upheaval and divisiveness. Reflecting on the past is so important so we can learn from it as we look to the next chapter. But we also need to consider the ways in which the future may look absolutely nothing like the past, and to think boldly and creatively about how we'll address the next set of challenges and opportunities that come our way. And that's what this last session of the conference is designed to do. We're going to explore a variety of topics that will shape the world of the future and that we are sure will have an impact on financial health for years to come. And to help me do that, I'd like to invite my three panelists to the stage: Jimmy Chen, founder and CEO of Propel; Melinda Hightower, head of multicultural client segments at UBS and FHN's newest board member; and Todd Schreiber, Chief Strategy Officer of U.S. Businesses at Prudential Financial. Come on out, folks. Hello. If my panelists look a little nervous, it's because they only know a little bit about what's going to happen. That's what makes this fun and interesting. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to present an issue, and I'm going to make a bold claim about what it might mean for the future. It's not my personal prediction. It's just a conversation starter. Our panelists haven't seen these claims in advance. They've been armed with signs: agree, disagree. And after I make this bold claim, they're going to have about 5 seconds to let us know whether they agree or disagree by holding up their sign. We're then going to have a short conversation about that. And then when we're done, we're going to turn it to you and ask for a show of hands to see what you think about the issue. And then we'll go on to the next one. So, all good? I promise this will be painless, a lot of fun. There are no right answers to these questions. Here we go. While some argue that robots are coming for our jobs, and others tout the benefits of AI in making workers' jobs easier, one question that has emerged, particularly in the past year as a result of some of the most recent strikes that we've seen, in particular the Hollywood writer and actor strikes, is how AI will influence the types of jobs available, leaving both blue and white collar workers potentially with fewer full-time, stable, and salaried positions. So, given that issue, here's my bold claim. AI will so severely diminish worker value that salaried wages, employer-offered benefits, and paid time off will largely become relics of a bygone era, leaving the government with no choice but to create a national guaranteed basic income program. Agree or disagree? All right, I didn't do a good job because I didn't get any dissent amongst the group. But I'm going to start with you, Jimmy, in part because you have more experience than others on this panel with guaranteed basic income programs.
Yeah, and I don't disagree because I think a basic income program would be a bad idea, or that cash payments as a form of kind of supplementing the safety net is a bad idea. And it's actually a fantastic idea based on, you referenced some of the work that we've done in this domain in the past. We had a Give Directly partnership that is ongoing and has been extremely effective in cash grants. I think the source of my disagreement is, well, to your point about no right or wrong answers, no one knows. No one in this room or in the world really knows where AI is going. And I think we're in a moment where it feels like it's truly limitless, and it could be. But the place that I'm making my bet right now is that I think the technology is going to be a platform shift and a major change in the way that people access a lot of services. In our world, it's social services and safety net services, as well as financial services. But it's going to stop short of the robots take over the world, everything ends, the economy is fundamentally a whole different thing, and people are just in leisure all the time. Potential. I don't discount that there is a non-zero chance that could happen, and hey, that's something that's worth discussing. But the place that I'm placing my chips right now is that it's going to fall short of that and be an important platform shift, but not one that, to your point, makes things like payroll or the employer relationship totally obsolete.
All right. What about you, Mel?
So I disagreed with just a part of that statement, not all of it. And so maybe next time I'll do some sort of sideways thing. So, or flash both sides of the card. So I do think that it will diminish the employer relationship. But I don't think it will lead to sort of these governmental solutions. They rarely do. I think that the US in particular tends to steadfastly rely on privatized solutions to its most pressing problems, even those such as AI. The reason I'm not robots will take over is because I remember that these were some of the same concerns when the tech industry came on board and came to rise in prominence decades ago, and those have not borne out yet. I also think that it won't eliminate jobs because you'll still need, there will be a whole new suite of roles available for the maintenance, the development, the ongoing support of AI-enabled tech. The one concern I have is AI and most tech advancements tend to displace the most vulnerable populations first. And without significant upskilling, it's only going to exacerbate the inequities that exist. So that's my concern. So it's a sort of agree.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that.
Yeah, I have to say I completely agree with everything that Mel just said. I mean, in some ways, we have been having a form of this conversation for over 100 years. Every time a new major technology shift comes out, there's this prediction of, oh, well, there's the death of this type of worker. And to be sure, some of the nature of work definitely does change. And I would say with AI, we will see certain roles be displaced, and there will be other roles that are created. The challenge is, and I think it's easy for some to say oh, well, new roles will be created. But it's not as simple as just saying, all right, the workers that are displaced, just move into those roles. There has to be a fundamental shift in terms of the type of training that we are providing.
Got it. Okay, audience, how many of you agree with the bold statement that I shared a few moments ago when I said that AI will so severely diminish worker value that wages, employer-offered benefits, and paid time off will largely become relics, and the government will have no choice but to create a national guaranteed basic income program? Does anyone agree with that? Very nice job, panelists. Okay. We're going to go on to the next topic. For yet another year in a row, we've seen record-breaking high temperatures, historic wildfires, worker deaths as a result of heat exhaustion. Home insurance companies, including Allstate and State Farm, have reduced business operations in states like California and Florida, which are ripe for extreme weather events. So here's my bold claim. In another 10 years, large swaths of the United States, including entire towns and cities, will be uninhabitable, not only because they are too hot to live safely, but because insurance providers will no longer offer a financial backstop. Agree or disagree? Wow, didn't expect that. Todd, I know you're not a P&C insurer, but you know the insurance industry, so I'm going to start with you.
Well, what I'll say is that my wife, who has been saying that we're sort of hell bent to retire in Florida, is now saying, well, I don't know, maybe we need to look at other places. I mean, what's the change, I think the change that we're seeing is really fundamental, where you're seeing certain insurers completely back out of certain geographies. And it's not a matter of, okay, just pay up, raise your premium 50, 100, 200%. They're completely backing out. It wouldn't surprise me if there was, if we saw something in the future where there was some type of regulatory action where the government stepped in and said, you know what, this is not okay. We need to have a backstop for these areas, because again, similar to the other point and the point that the other question and the point that Mel was making, there's a very certain demographic that really gets highly disadvantaged here. And I think that's where you're going to see government step in and say, we need to provide protection.
Yeah, although it's really interesting because government does provide flood insurance, and we know that it is not remotely, it's also underfunded, if you will. So, Mel.
Yeah, so the reason I put up agree is I think of it from the mortgage side of the house, right? So you're not legally required to have insurance in order to be a homeowner. The fact is, though, is that most banks require it in order to underwrite the mortgage. And we know that relatively few Americans can afford to buy their home outright. There will be some level of financing. So when you have these, what I call insurance deserts that exist, and I say this as a Californian, so when you have these insurance deserts that exist and that are starting to crop up, even now across the country, people have no choice but to move. And you won't have any new residents coming in. So it depletes home values because people can't sell, because the new buyers won't be able to get insurance. And so I think that's where I'm looking at it now. But I also think that when you have these kinds of climate change, the lack of insurance or the insurance gaps, we know tend to impact communities of color to a greater degree than they do the average person. And so I think those two things in combination will lead to what I call sort of these insurance no-person zones.
Jimmy, round us out.
Yeah, the only thing I was waffling about was whether it'd be 10 years or 15 years, but it seems kind of inevitable that this is the direction that things are headed. I mean, the way that we view this problem tends to be a little bit less from the insurance standpoint, but more from the point of view of what happens when there is an unexpected emergency in one of those states that you can look at and say, like, oh, wow, those things are happening a lot more often now. And what we've seen over the last few years is that just like the need is flexibility, because fundamentally no one can predict when hurricanes, droughts, these types of things are happening, but it's inarguable that they're happening more often. And so when we look at to Mel's point, the populations that are already financially vulnerable on the ground, they have fewer safety nets and fewer kind of savings cushions to prepare for those events. What are the things that both the private sector and the public sector can jointly do to account for the fact that we all kind of agree that things are headed in the direction of more unpredictability and probably larger financial shocks?
All right, audience, it's your turn. In another 10 years or 15, large swaths of the United States will be uninhabitable, not just because it's too hot, but because there will be no insurance providers. How many people agree? Hands up. Okay, hands down. How many disagree? I think the agrees have it here. All right, very interesting. How many of you come from one of those states where you think this is going to be a problem? Florida, Arizona, California, yeah. All right, moving on to another interesting topic. The cost of care for older Americans continues to rise as average life expectancy increases and the number of people over 65 grows. In fact, the number of Americans over 65 is projected to exceed the number of children for the first time in history by 2034. That's 11 years from now. Despite the growing demand for care jobs, caregivers are generally underpaid. A BCG report for 2022 estimated that the U.S. will lose roughly $290 billion a year in GDP in 2030 and beyond without action to fix the care economy. So here's my bold claim. Failure to prioritize bold actions both public and private, that fundamentally shift market conditions of the care economy will result in a national aging crisis reminiscent of the elderly poverty crisis prior to the passage of the Social Security Act of 1935. Right, Todd, no hedging. All right, we finally got a little bit of disagreement. Mel, you go first.
So I think a couple of things that come to my mind. So the US is probably the worst place for childcare, elder care families among the wealthiest nations. I think the US spends about 0.7% of its GDP on care. Compared to other, wealthy nations, on average, they spend about 2%. Italy, for example, spends about 13% of its GDP on care solutions. So we are falling behind. And then the second thing that stands out to me is who's actually holding these care jobs right now. And about a third of home health care workers and about a quarter of personal care workers are immigrants, right? And that's why you see the disparities happening in the pay. And then given where the US is on its immigration policy, there will be, where there's a focus on skill, on sort of education and some of these tech labor roles, healthcare workers are not a priority, at least home healthcare workers, who oftentimes aren't even lumped in with healthcare workers for immigration purposes. So that's why I think there's going to be a crisis. And I look at it, even personal examples. We know people who are leaving the workforce, for example, or being sandwiched at both ends because they may have young children at home and they also are coping with aging parents. So you see that happening more and more. And I think it's going to be a groundswell if it's not fixed.
Maybe I'll just add on, and then Jimmy can tell
it.
us why we're both wrong.
Yeah.
So, what I would say is, what I would add on to Mel's points, and again, agree completely. I think also what you're seeing is a lot of these same workers, they're gig workers. They don't have the same type of steady employment, and so gig workers, we know, don't have the same types of benefits that someone with a corporate job has. And the other thing that I think is that we're going to see is as the population ages, is so many of the people who care for the elderly are family members, right? Like, I'm part of that sandwich generation, and so what you can see happening is as the elderly need more care, that's going to create a stress on the workforce, and it's going to create it's going to create a stress on the workforce and on the employers who who are employing all those folks. So you can see all these things coming down the pike.
So maybe what we should be leaning into from an employer benefit perspective now are elder care. I know some folks already offer that, but maybe more there. Maybe there'll be more incentive, I should say, for companies to do that. Interesting. All right, Jimmy, why are they wrong?
I disagreed for two reasons. The first is that I think the way you phrased the question, Jen, was something around that there needed to be the creation of new programs, or that the public and private sector need to do like truly net new, novel, major things in order to avoid this crisis. And while I think net new programs would certainly be helpful, I think we're also in a state where there are significant existing programs that in many cases have administration challenges. I think about things like Social Security, things like SSI and SSDI, things like Medicare, that are already major sources of public funding, hundreds of billions of dollars. Where I think, from our point of view as Propel, a company that's focused on improving the user experience of the safety net, that there are so many wins that you can have in how people experience these programs on a day-to-day basis, enroll in them, re-enroll in them, navigate them, that actually there's a massive opportunity just in terms of kind of improving the usability of the existing pots of funding. And then I think the other part of my disagreement is more of a downer, which was the second half of this, was that it would be a net new national crisis. And I guess from where we sit, it sort of feels like many parts of the population are already in crisis, if not close to it. I think about, the end of pandemic era, SNAP benefits as an example of something that has already introduced levels of crisis among low-income communities in recent months. And while it is absolutely possible that the demographic factors around aging could, introduce further challenges, it's sort of hard for me to say that that's going to be above and beyond a substantially new challenge above what we have now.
Got it. So I'm curious, I know that Propel thinks about and wants to be a platform that's around the entire safety net, but you got your start with food stamp benefits.
Yeah.
Do you find that a lot of your food stamp benefit recipients also receive Social Security or other forms of benefits that are aimed at older Americans?
Absolutely. There's a lot of cross-enrollment across a lot of these programs, and that's by design. That enrolling in one program makes it easier for you to find the others, and while there's opportunities there as well, we definitely see a lot of that. We actually have seen a slight trend. So the company's been around for 9 years now, and so we've got these demographic facts about how our user base has changed over time. The user base has gotten older over time, right? We're a smartphone app, so we naturally are the kind of early adopters were people who were 35 and younger, and while that still is the majority of our user base, we've had a growing population of people 65 and up that are using the app. We also see, to Todd's point about the sandwich generation, a growing population of people using the app to help someone else in their household. So they may not personally be receiving benefits, but they're using the app to manage it on behalf of someone else. And so it just complicates what we're building for, but is kind of the reality of the safety net these days.
Got it. Okay, audience, it's your turn. Failure to prioritize bold public and private actions that fundamentally shift market conditions of the care economy will result in a national aging crisis as bad as the one that led to the creation of Social Security. Who agrees with that? All right, hands down. Who disagrees? Okay. All right. All right, one more. This one is touchy. In the wake of George Floyd's murder, lots of companies and organizations made bold commitments to address racial inequities in the United States. Since then, I want to share two statistics. One is the percentage of Russell 3000 companies with no racial or ethnic board diversity has declined from 38% in 2012 to 10% in 2022. That's a good trend. Meanwhile, the National Urban League's Equality Index, which compares how Black and white Americans fare on a variety of metrics, including income, educational attainment, health outcomes, and incarceration rates, only improved by 0.1 of a percentage point between 2020 and 2022. So my maybe not so bold claim is that the racial equity commitments that we saw in the wake of George Floyd's murder have largely failed. He's still thinking. Do, 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 do.
I'm thinking about it. I'll take the disagree.
Okay. Mel.
You're lucky there was no buzzer, because this is one topic that I live and breathe in my current role on really thinking about how race and ethnicity sort of plays a role in all decisions, but particularly financial ones. So I think a couple of things. I think first, what you saw in the wake of George Floyd, and we're among friends, I'll be very blunt, was a lot of performative corporate allyship, where you saw big, bold claims. I can't tell you that there's a list that I used to keep of how many billions of dollars were going to close the racial equity gap and how many coalitions were formed. But fast forward to now, very few companies can tell you how the money was spent. Very few companies can point to the incremental outcomes that they achieved. And I think most of the time what we saw is where money was spent, it was on business-aligned outcomes, meaning that the money went to sort of bolstering up loan programs, when that might not have been the product solution that drove equity forward. And I think what's also really interesting is that I've seen it firsthand where the job searches at the top of the house changed. I was just in a meeting with the Corporate Directors Association where now in the wake of all of the affirmative action litigation, people are afraid to be intentional about diversity on their corporate boards. They're just afraid because everyone knows that corporate diversity programs are next in line. First, it was the Fearless Fund. Next, it was the law firms that are running fellowship programs. And after that, it's gonna be corporate diversity programs. And the corporate consultants are now advising C-suites to back away from diversity initiatives that have targets, diversity initiatives that really have that measurement factor accountable. Basically, in my mind, backing away from accountability. So that is why I think that they've largely failed, because they were symbolic to begin with, and then any effort requires more time to be truly impactful. You can't sort of reverse decades, centuries of systemic inequality in 3 years.
Yeah.
You just can't.
Jimmy.
I think of that popular saying that I'll butcher, but is like, you show me the incentive and I'll show you what the outcome is, right? It's like, if the incentive is to like avoid getting, your employees quitting or getting in the headlines, and what you measure is like board diversity as the only metric, or whether or not you have Juneteenth as a holiday or whatever it is, then like that's the outcome you're gonna get, and you're not gonna necessarily get the downstream outcome of true equity unless there's different incentives in place. So.
All right, Todd, thank you for taking the
So-
opposite. I know you were torn.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to agree with. There's absolutely lots to agree with, and I guess what I would say is that the efforts and the results are highly unevenly distributed. So I'll just, I work at Prudential. I'll just for a minute, Prudential's investing $1 billion, over a series of years into Newark, into other cities. We have a Blueprints to Black Wealth initiative where we are building a set of tools and services to really help a new generation of Black savers build wealth over time. I'll go back to what I said before. The success of all of this work across the U.S. again, the results have been really mixed. But I guess what I would say is, there's this old phrase that, the best time to build a tree, the best time to grow a tree, to plant a tree, sorry, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. And the next best time to plant a tree is today. And so these things take time.
Yeah.
It takes time and it takes effort. I'm like an optimistic person by nature. And so I think these are fundamental, sticky, very difficult problems that we need to continue to work at. And it is going to take time. But I think, if I look around, there is more happening now than I think there really ever has been before. And so I am optimistic that we are pointed in the right direction if results have been, somewhat slow.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Mel.
And I was going to say, Todd, I think you might have hit on the one area of optimism that there is in all of this process where you have racial equity built into the business as opposed to a standalone program, where you have support coming from the C-suite and not from and not bottom up from like the employee networks who are making an ask that may or may not be fulfilled. And when you have line managers and all the way up held accountable, then I think that's where you truly see progress, because you see companies changing their business in order to become more inclusive, and that by nature is going to drive outcomes. And so I think I would love to see more of that.
Yeah, and I would just say, given that it's hard to put a corporate executive on the stage and ask him to pillory his own company, I want to say that Prudential has been investing in Newark, its hometown, for 20 years.
I would say we've been investing in Newark for 150 years.
Right, but I mean, a very, very long time.
Yes.
Long before the events of the last few years.
That's right.
And I would also say that Prudential is one of the only companies that I am aware of that over the last couple of years has publicly reckoned with the role that the company played in the slave trade, et cetera, and has publicly apologized for that. That's also a very rare action that others have taken, and I really commend Prudential for the work that they've done there. Okay, audience. All those commitments failed? Agree or disagree? Agree. All right, disagree. Okay, so I want to just, I know we're out of time, but moderator's prerogative. I want to sum this up. Like, there are lots of other issues we didn't touch on. This was a great way to kind of get a high-level, kind of broad stroke at what we're probably going to be grappling with in the next chapter of the Financial Health Network. In each of your roles, where are you most focused as you think about these big, hairy issues, whether they're positive or challenging, right? What are you most, let's end on a positive note, what are you most excited about? Where do you think is the greatest tailwind? We talked a lot about headwinds, but let's talk about some tailwinds. Jimmy, can I ask you to go first?
Sure. I mean, look, we started on AI. I think AI has a huge potential to be a tailwind, especially in a domain that's characterized by friction, difficulty of access of information, imperfect, decision making. I think there's the optimist view on AI is that there's an opportunity to fundamentally change with this new technology a lot of people's interactions with the safety net, with financial services, with some of the tough challenges that people face every day. I think the thing that I'm most optimistic about for Propel, and also one of the reasons why we have so loved being part of the Financial Health Network family for so long, is this idea that financial health is not purely a financial services challenge, and that, as Jen said, it is something that has to cut across a bunch of different sectors. And so, we at Propel focus on government benefits, but also financial services. Our work is expanding into healthcare. Our work is expanding into green energy and how people access those systems. And that just like a lot of these things, when you talk to somebody who is using our service or just any financial services consumer, they rarely think of their life as siloed. Mm-hmm. They see it as, just trying to make it through the month, navigating these different challenges that I've got, and they don't really care if you consider this a healthcare challenge or an education challenge or a financial services one. And so I think the best products and the companies that are going to really be able to successfully meet their customers are the ones that can really internalize that and break down their silos and think about it more holistically, which I think, this organization really embodies, and this group of people is deeply supportive of.
I love it. You're singing from my, what's the analogy? From my songbook? Melinda.
So I think the thing that I'm most excited about is, I mentioned it earlier, is really helping the folks at UBS and my colleagues at UBS really understand the incredible business opportunity that's in front of them. That's where I get excited, and my focus is clients. I'm focused on them, and I am excited about them because what I think about, and I think the tailwind to our business, is demographic change is coming, whether we like it or not. As we think about the trends, as we become a more multicultural society, as women are owning their worth, outliving men, and owning their decisions, their wealth decisions, as we think about we call the rising generation, how they are steadfast and adamant about not wanting the banking institution or not wanting it to work the same. We're starting to see the ripple effect of that in our business already. And so that's what I'm most excited about, because I do think businesses pay attention, great businesses that want to be sustainable and relevant decades from now pay attention to their clients. And as the client base changes, so will the business. And I think that's what excites me about the future.
Thank you. Todd, you get the last word.
So kind of like I was saying before, I mean, what excites me and what gives me hope is that we are we're having more of these conversations, frankly, than we have ever had before. And you've seen employers really turn towards their employees and think about their financial wellness and think about their now even more so, their holistic wellness. And perhaps they're doing that because they know that it helps their bottom line. But I also, the optimistic side of me says, you know what, they're doing that because they know it's the right thing as well. And so as we have more of these conversations and we put more focus on employees and they're achieving better outcomes for them, that's going to raise a lot of standards for across that population.
Awesome. Help me thank our wonderful panel for playing along today. Well, that last session is a great reminder that as we celebrate our 20 years of accomplishments, we really have to acknowledge just how much more work lies ahead of us, and both the challenges and the opportunities ahead. I am humbled. We face a post-pandemic world, deep-rooted racism, climate-driven disasters, and rapidly evolving technology that we don't yet really fully understand. And financial health trends are going in the wrong direction despite our best efforts. The gaps are starting to widen further, especially for women and people of color. As we look to the future, individual strategies and solutions, many of which have been on display at this conference, are going to be important but not sufficient. We really have to challenge the status quo around how markets work and how business gets done, rewiring our systems to drive truly lasting change. Empathy and caring have to be the fuel for that work so that we're designing systems that are equitable and that meet the needs of the people whose financial health is most challenged. In a few months, we're going to kick off a campaign to reflect on our collective progress, to rethink our work and our systems, and to rewire our society to genuinely support financial health for all. Reflect, rethink, rewire. It's an opportunity for all of us to tell our stories of impact, to share what's worked, and to set bold goals for the journey ahead. All of this is then going to culminate in June 2024 for Emerge Financial Health, our flagship conference. If you thought this was a great event, and it was, get ready to really be blown away in June in Chicago, our hometown. June 5th through 7th, mark your calendars now. I invite all of you to come and join us. Come and help us write the next chapter of impact and lead the charge to drive financial health for all. I can't wait to see you there. Until then, thank you for being here in Philadelphia for Emerge Insights and for all of your engagement and commitment to doing the hard work of financial health. Safe travels to everybody, and I look forward to seeing you soon.